Biden administration is rolling out these central bank digital currencies. And if these World Health Organization instruments pass, we could be in a digital gulag very shortly unless people rise up and register their opposition.
Keeping our republic is on the line, and it requires patriots with great passion, dedication, and eternal vigilance to preserve our freedoms. Jenny Beth Martin is the co-founder of Tea Party Patriots. She is an author, a filmmaker, and one of Time Magazine's most influential people in the world. But the title she is most proud of is mom to her boy-girl twins. She has been at the forefront, fighting to protect America's core principles for more than a decade. Welcome to the Jenny Beth Show.
Reggie Littlejohn is an attorney and the founder and president of Women's Rights Without Frontiers, where she represents women in oppressive nations. Reggie is also the co-founder of a new coalition called the Sovereignty Coalition that is focused on withdrawing from the World Health Organization. In today's episode, Reggie will explain why this is such an important effort. Reggie, it's so great to have you here with us today, and I'm looking forward to talking to you about some of the things that you've founded and started and the coalitions you're part of, and also about the World Health Organization and some of the dangers that we face as Americans and as America. So let's just get right into it. You started out and you founded Women's Rights Without Frontiers. Explain that a little bit. It implies to me that means it's women's rights beyond America.
Yes, Jenny Beth. So I am an attorney, and I represented a couple of Chinese refugees in the mid-90s who were victims of the one-child policy, and one of them was forcibly sterilized, meaning that she was literally dragged out, and they performed this operation without anesthesia, and she was permanently disabled after that. So I left the practice of law and founded Women's Rights Without Frontiers to advocate for women's rights in China.
That's a tough thing to do.
Oh, it was a tough, but what I did is the Chinese Communist Party had basically propagandized the world. Everybody, including myself, before I had these clients, believed that forced abortion, that the one-child policy was voluntary, and I documented that it was enforced through forced abortion, forced sterilization, and even infanticide, the killing of born infants. So from that, I started saving baby girls in rural China because they're selectively aborted and abandoned. And then from that, I started saving abandoned widows in the Chinese countryside. And I'm still the founder and president of Women's Rights Without Frontiers, and all those programs are going full force.
Wow.
But in the course of being a China watcher and analyzing human rights violations in China, I started to understand the way the totalitarianism works. And that's when I became very alarmed a couple years ago with the prospect of vaccine passports.
Right.
Okay. Because they can support the same platform as the China social credit system, which is a tool of mass surveillance and totalitarian control. And that's when I, with Frank Gaffney, co-founded the Stop Vaccine Passports task force. And we have, I think, put together the best information in the world in terms of our webinars that we've had dealing with the way that vaccine mandates, vaccine passports, digital health IDs combined to create a digital gulag that could install totalitarianism in our own land. And from that, when I saw what the World Health Organization regulations and the new pandemic treaty were proposing, it's absolutely it's a confluence of digital health IDs combining, with central bank digital currency, could potentially enslave the United States and the world. And that's why Frank Gaffney and I, again, co-founded the Sovereignty Coalition to address the threat by the World Health Organization and other threats to the United States sovereignty.
Okay. Before we go into the World Health Organization and threats to America's sovereignty, I want to unpack some of what you just said because it's a lot. So I'm going to try to do it in order. First, and I really want to focus on the vaccine passport aspect. But before we get to that, the China one-child policy is so disturbing. I first heard about that. I remember hearing about it in being in elementary school in 5th grade. I was 10 years old when I guess it began, or it came to my awareness. That would have been like in 1980, 1981.
Right. Exactly.
And then a couple years later, I learned about what abortion actually is, and I kind of was able to put those pieces together, but did not fully understand everything about it. And I went through fertility treatments, and some of my friends in the infertility space, when we were all going through issues with that, some of them wound up adopting girls from China, because basically you can only adopt girls from China because the boys are never put up for adoption, it seems. I mean, that's not fair, because I actually know one young man who's in the United States military who was adopted from China, and he was born in China. But it seemed like largely it was the girls who wound up being left without parents. So those things I was a little bit aware of. Then I watched this documentary that is on Amazon. I think it's One Child Policy, or China's One Child Policy.
One Child Nation.
Oh my goodness. I watched it before COVID broke out, and it made me sick. And it showed the sterilization, and it showed women being pulled from their homes, and then this one portion, I don't want to spoil the documentary for people who haven't seen it. I encourage everyone in the audience to go on Amazon and get that documentary and watch it. It's so important to understand. This one doctor, she had a flag, like a banner, what we would call kind of a banner, for every single abortion that she'd ever performed. And she showed them like hanging in her closet and in her house, and they were just everywhere. It was so many. I don't even know how she could have possibly counted them all. And I think it was her penance, her way of asking for forgiveness in some manner, or honoring what had happened to these babies who she'd aborted. I appreciate the fact that you've done that, and I don't even know a tenth of what you know. It must just be very startling to understand what happened in China with that policy.
Well, the Chinese Communist Party about 10 years ago boasted that they had prevented 400 million lives through the one-child policy. So that number, 400 million.
Almost 500 million babies.
Right. Well, okay, that number, 400 million, it was greater than the entire population of the United States and Canada combined. And that number is 10 years old. At this point, I think it's more like 500 million, because they have continued aborting.
Have they said they've ended that policy?
Okay, so this is a good question, because every time they modify their policy, they say that the mainstream media comes out and says they've ended it, they've abandoned it. So they went from a one-child policy to a two-child policy. I believe it was in 2016, and then from a two-child policy to a three-child policy, I believe it was in 2021. But they still have a three-child policy. So why do they have to have any policy? They are desperate to have more babies. What they see now is that they don't have enough young people to support their rapidly aging population. I don't know why they have to be still saying that it's illegal to have a baby if you're unmarried, because the rule is every married couple is allowed to have 3 children, and fourth children are still illegal. And I believe that this policy is still being enforced selectively in populations that they don't like. So, for example, in Xinjiang, among the Uyghurs, or in Tibet, among the Tibetans, the minorities. So anyway, it's totally, totally devastating. As far as I'm concerned, every one of those little lives ended is a victim of communism. So that's 500 million victims of communism. And then if you add in their mothers, it's 1 billion. And if you add in their fathers, it's 1.5 billion. People don't talk about the effect of the one-child policy or even the two-child policy on men, but it's devastating to them as well. I mean, just imagine if your wife is grabbed out of the bed next to you and you can't do anything about it, and she goes and aborts your child, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's just devastating for the entire family.
And having watched that documentary, which is, it's just, for me, it was very disturbing and enlightening to watch, because it crystallized things that I knew in a much better way. But having watched that prior to what we saw with COVID, and understanding that they were enslaving Uyghurs, and so I knew both of those pieces of information. What I realized before 2020 is that this is a country, China is a country that does not respect basic human rights. They don't respect life. They don't respect bodily autonomy. They don't respect the ability to think for yourself, to make decisions about whether you want to grow your family or not on your own, and even what religion you choose to be. So they don't respect any of that. They just simply do not respect basic human rights. And it's important for us to understand that as a country, that they do not respect it the same way we do. So if they're in charge of standard boards for technology, or they're in charge of standard boards in the United Nations or the World Health Organization or the World Trade Organization, their mindset and their lack of respect for basic human rights is going to be present in all of the standards and policies that they create.
That's absolutely right. And we saw that during COVID,
yes,
where the World Health Organization imposed globally what not just me, what is the China model. So China was basically calling the shots with forced vaccination, mask mandates, forced quarantine, and all the rest of it. This is all the China model, and China is extremely influential in the United Nations and also in the World Health Organization. So that if the World Health Organization is going to take over global health care, we are absolutely running the risk that the China model is going to be imposed worldwide, including in the United States.
Okay, and I want to come into that in a little more detail. When we talk about the China model, at the beginning of 2020, prior to locking down, so in January and February of 2020, I was listening to Steve Bannon's War Room every single day, and he launched War Room Pandemic either the day I was on co-hosting his program, his political program about impeachment, or it was the day before, the day after. So somewhere in that 3-day period, he launched Pandemic, and I started listening to it and listened to every single episode. So by February, I was going, we're going to lock down our country. Oh my goodness, we're going to lock down our country. And I was telling people there's this pandemic, there's this virus, and we're going to lock down. We're going to wind up doing what China did, and this will be devastating. And even if we don't, we're about to see the effects of it because they've locked down, and our supply chain is so dependent on them that in 6 to 8 weeks, maybe 3 months from now, we're going to start not having things on our shelves because we're a just-in-time because of just-in-time manufacturing. I knew we'd start having empty shelves. I used to work for the Home Depot, and I was in the imports division working on computers within that. So I kind of had an idea of how the supply chain works in terms of time. And everyone thought I was crazy. And then as soon as we did lock down, I was saying to people, and within even the conservative movement, I was going, why are we locking our country down? Why are we following the model of China, who doesn't even respect basic human rights? Because that documentary was in my mind. And Italy, who has a fully socialized healthcare system. We were opposed to a socialized healthcare and Obamacare. So why are we modeling our decisions based on the Chinese Communist Party and Italy's socialized healthcare system? And we've seen devastating effects around this country, especially in the states and municipalities that continue to follow their lead.
Exactly. And the thing is that at that time, the World Health Organization was recommending these things.
Right.
Okay. So you had a choice. You could either follow them like the
Right.
United States did, or you could not follow them like Sweden did. and
Right.
ended up with a much better outcome than we did. Okay,
Correct.
So, but what these new accords are trying to do is to shift World Health Organization recommendations to be binding, so we will no longer even have a choice. We're going to have to follow whatever they say.
Okay. And I want to get into that. Let's focus about the vaccine, stop vaccine passports, and then we'll get into the World Health Organization and really get into those details. Okay. For people, I'm sure there are people who are listening right now who took the vaccine, and this is not. I have my own opinions about it. It's probably not hard to figure them out, but it isn't about whether you took the vaccine or not, whether you chose to take it or not. I am fully in support and favor of individuals making their own health care decisions with the advice of their doctors for their own bodies. They know what's going on with their body better than I do. So choice when it comes to whether you want to take new novel drugs or not is up to you. But what you were saying is not stop COVID vaccines. You were saying stop vaccine passports.
Exactly.
Delve into what you mean by that, because that's going to be important as we talk about the rest of what we're going forward with.
Well, thank you so much for making that distinction, Jenny Beth. So people on the Stop Vaccine Passports Task Force, some of us have been vaccinated. A lot of us haven't. Some of us are actually vaccine injured. So we've got a mix in there. And we're not saying stop the COVID vaccine. What we're saying is stop the vaccine passport. So what's a vaccine passport? Vaccine Passport is an app on your phone that says what your vaccine status is. And so this is a digital health ID, and it can be called a smart health card, vaccine passport, digital health ID. But also something that people should be aware of is this system that I'm about to describe could be supported by any mandatory digital ID, including a mandatory driver's license. So we're opposing the mandatory driver's licenses for the same reason. Digital driver's license, okay? And so what this does, this digital platform can support the same platform as the China social credit system. So let me explain this China social credit system, because this is what got me involved when I saw that this was the case. So in China, they have something called the social credit system, and what it is they track everything about you. The difference between China and the United States, they also track everything about you, but it's not centralized into a score of how dependable of a citizen you are. So in China, they have, facial recognition, real-time geolocation, meaning they know exactly, where you are. They know what your network of relationships is. They track all of your social media posts, your internet search history. So if you search for things they don't like for example, if you search for Tiananmen Square, your score will go down, or you could even have, internet police at your door. Your internet spending history, they know everything that you spend, all of your internet activity. Like if you log on to Xi Jinping Thought, which is their propagandizing, brainwashing, your score goes up. If you play too many video games, your score goes down. Your criminal history, and of course, your medical history, especially your vaccination status. All these things are put together, and you're given a score. And if you have a high score, what that means is that you're living life the way that the Chinese Communist Party wants you to, okay? You're not making any waves. You're never challenging them. You are a good communist sheep that they can depend on to cave to whatever they want you to cave to, all right? If you have a mind of your own and you do some internet searches that would that they don't like maybe Free Tibet or Uyghur genocide or Taiwan, whatever it is, your score is going to go down. And so what does that mean? Okay, what it means initially is you lose your job. Your kid can't go to a good school. You can't buy a ticket for transportation. You can't borrow money, so you can't buy a house or start a business. And if you keep it up, then they will sever you from your bank account and your credit cards. And if you're a true dissident, they'll just disappear you. They know exactly what you look like. They know exactly where you are. all the time. And if people think that this could not happen in the West, just think about the fact that with the truckers' strike in Canada, the Canadian government froze the bank accounts and the credit cards, not only of the truckers, but of anyone who had even donated to the truckers. Right. This has happened in North America.
And earlier in the very beginning, you mentioned something about gulags and totalitarianism in reference to the vaccine passports. When you were saying disappear you and gulags, explain a little bit more, elaborate on that. How can they disappear you? People are going to hear this and go, oh, no, that can't really happen.
Well, I hope it won't happen. I really hope it won't happen. But what we call a digital gulag is the combination of the vaccine passport, which is a surveillance. It's something that is surveils you,
right?
And together with a central bank digital currency, which is something that's its own. I mean, we could do a whole thing just on central bank digital currencies, but a central bank digital currency is the opposite of Bitcoin. It's centralized. It's not decentralized. And if you combine that with a cashless society, then if they don't like what you stand for, if they find you to be counter-narrative, they can shut you off from your central bank digital currency and paralyze you in that way. And something about central bank digital currencies, just to get them out, this out, is that they are programmable. Okay, so what that means is that the central bank, so in our case it would be the Federal Reserve, number one, will know every transaction that you make, right, and they will be able to they will be in a position to approve it or disapprove it. And if, for example, they decide that there is a quarantine lockdown and they say you can't go more than a mile from your home or 5 miles from your home, you go 6 miles from your home and try to buy something at the store, and your central bank digital currency, you will not be able to. You'll be stopped. And they could also do things like saying, okay, so you've chosen not to be vaccinated. You can't leave your house, and we're just shutting off your central bank digital currency. It can be used to force people into vaccination.
Okay, and so if people are listening to this, there are going to be many who understand and know that this is possible, and others who may find it difficult to believe. We just have to remember that Governor Whitmer in Michigan roped off seeds and sections of like the toy section or something of Walmart and Home Depot so that you could only buy certain things within the store, and closed other stores during COVID. Do you remember this? You may not, but they made a list of what was acceptable to buy and what was not, and they were even like roping off sections of the store so you couldn't buy those things. You're already in the store. What difference does it make whether you're picking up a packet of seeds or a toy for your kids so that they have something new to do and they keep calm while they can't go outside and do anything? And that was shocking to me because I was in Georgia where Governor Kemp opened the state, and the toy store right up the road, like 2 miles from my house, was open and you could go buy toys. So I just was like, this is craziness. I remember that very well. Also, in 2021, I had to go to New York for some business meetings, and at the time, everywhere in New York was requiring the vaccine card to prove that you had been vaccinated in order to eat at a restaurant.
The Excelsior Pass, right?
I don't know what it was called because I did not have one. And so I was in New York. I flew in. The rules were just silly because I could fly in, get in a car, go somewhere within New York, but I couldn't get food. So I couldn't even go in a restaurant. So I had to just sit in Central Park in between my meetings, and I was not able to eat all day long. I had no food at all. I couldn't go into the restaurants. And then I went back over to the airport, which isn't exactly in New York City. I don't remember if I was at JFK or LaGuardia, but then once you're in the airport, you can buy food again, and there were no requirements. So it was so silly because, you have all these people coming in from all over the country, or even, I guess, the world, but especially the country, and you could get food within the airport, and they're interacting with people who live in New York City. But then when you're in New York City, you can't get food. It just was crazy. But the point is, I experienced as an American citizen in 2021 not being able to eat because I wasn't willing to show an ID related to my health care. It happened already here. And then the stuff about the banks already happened, as you mentioned, with the truckers.
Right. So these threats are kind of unthinkable to people.
To experience it, and you're the victim of it. And you just sit there going, it makes me, when I hear about people, they get really upset with me in some parts of the country. I'm like, I would never do a business with a restaurant that demanded that kind of requests from me. And they're like, well, we wouldn't have been able to go to a restaurant. I'm like, okay, then don't go to a restaurant. You know, to me, but I'm pretty hardcore. I guess I'm more hardcore than others, but I just, I wouldn't want to live in a place like that. And I don't want all of America to become that way.
Well, see, this is the thing. I mean, people need to understand that we are on track to become this way.
Right.
The Biden administration is rolling out these central bank digital currencies. And if these World Health Organization instruments pass, we could be in a digital gulag very shortly unless people rise up and find out about it and register their opposition.
Okay, so let's work on that part now. So we just kind of got through other things that I think are interesting that people would want to know about with your background and the work you've been doing. What are these instruments that the World Health Organization is looking at right now?
So there's two instruments. One is the pandemic treaty, and the other one is amendments to the international health regulations. And both of these are going to come up for a vote at the World Health Assembly in May of 2024. But don't think that that's a long time from now. That is very, very shortly. So the United States is in the process of negotiating these. And the way that it's going to work, I believe, is that the regulations can pass by a simple majority in the World Health Assembly. And I think that the pandemic treaty, which they're not calling a treaty, they're calling it an accord or an instrument because they don't want it to have to pass through the treaty process worldwide. That probably will need a 2/3 majority vote, but that is a 2/3 majority vote of the member states of the World Health Organization. So there's 194 countries, they're called members, and a simple majority of all these countries would pass the international health regulations, 2/3 the treaty, but the United States just has one vote.
Right.
And so we can't, it would be very hard for us to stop these from happening on the World Health Assembly level because all we have is one vote.
Okay, and what are in them? Why do people need to oppose it? Let's start with one and then go to the other. So you pick which one, either order, but let's go through it.
We could start out with the amendments. Okay, the amendments to the international health regulations. There's three things that I've picked out about that. One is the amendments are the ones that strike the words non-binding. So right now, the international health regulations are just recommendations.
Which is how Sweden could choose not to, and other countries could choose to adopt, and states could choose what they wanted to do.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So that's stricken out. So that the World Health Organization, whatever they say, goes, and it's binding law everywhere in the world. The second thing is, right now, the World Health Organization only has jurisdiction or can only give recommendations on health emergencies like pandemics, things like that. The international health regulations would switch it so it's anything that is a potential pandemic or a potential health emergency, which greatly broadens what they can speak to.
Right, because pandemic has a very specific definition of a disease spreading through the world, but health potential
can be anything. Can be anything. And then the third thing is that in the international health regulations, they wanted to strike this language. So it's the language that is that these regulations shall be with the full respect for the dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms of persons.
Well, that would make sense because China doesn't support human rights.
Right.
Period. See, I said that earlier.
Yes, you did. And so they're striking the recommendation, the proposal is to strike that language and to replace it with they will be based on principles of equity, inclusivity, and coherence, whatever that means. I mean, that's totally vague. This previous language, the language that's in there now, comes from or is related to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This other language is just like, who knows what that means. So that is very concerning that they want to deliberately strike that language that protects our human rights. So now, with respect to the agreement, which I'm calling a treaty, that is very, very serious. So what they want to do is, number one, they want to establish a global surveillance state. So they want to. There's language in there that would require all countries to surveil people in order to see if there is any arising potential health issue. So that's surveillance. The second thing that they do, all the countries will be required to counteract misinformation or disinformation, which is going to basically, it's going to set up an international global disinformation governance board,
censorship board,
Ministry of Truth. Right. And the thing is that's so ironic about this is that the World Health Organization did such a miserable job in terms of the information that it was putting out about the pandemic. So in the beginning, they just parroted what the Chinese Communist Party said, especially about things like, there's no way that this was a lab leak. It was, but also they denied that there was human-to-human transmission in the beginning.
Right.
Okay. I mean, but they want to be in charge of what is misinformation or disinformation so that anyone who counters that, any doctor that says something that's different from what the World Health Organization says is going to be, silenced. Okay. And that's also part of the surveillance that they're going to surveil information through social listening. So they're going to be like monitoring social media accounts. And if there's, for example, a powerful doctor that is saying, what they're saying is wrong, there's a better way. What about early treatment? All that one will be picked up and silenced.
Right.
Right.
Right. Or it could be about any other health issue. They could be saying that drugs for transgender people could potentially be harmful to them, and that goes against the narrative right now. And
right.
It's too broad, and because it's so broad, it could be abused.
Oh yes. Another thing that they have, and this is really important. It's important for people to understand the One Health approach.
Okay,
Okay,
that should be good.
Right. So One Health.
I'm not serious, and it's good.
I know.
I want the audience to know.
I caught that. But yeah. So One Health means that human health is connected to animal health, is connected to plant health, is connected to the environment. Now, doesn't that sound all nice and holistic? But what it does is it gives the World Health Organization the power to come in and start telling the United States or any other country in the world how to handle anything concerning any potential health issue affecting humans, animals, plants, or the environment. So basically, it would give them control over every aspect of life on Earth.
That's just, it's too overreaching. And it is beyond health. The World Health Organization, why was it set up in the first place?
Okay, so this is the thing. The World Health Organization was set up, very humbly to try to help nations with their health, and it was funded by the nations themselves. Okay, since that time up to right now, the funding of the World Health Organization is greatly impacted by private interests. So, for example, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation are major funders, and then another Bill Gates Foundation, it's either Gavi or Seppi, but both of those what they want, they make money off of vaccines. And a very large portion of the World Health Organization budget now doesn't come from countries themselves. It comes from either, private interests or pharmaceutical related interests, so that that there is a profit motive that is entered in. If you have these people, these private interests, having major sway over what the World Health Organization is recommending. So, for example, if there's a private interest that would make a lot of money if the World Health Organization would recommend their vaccine or require their vaccine, that's a conflict of interest. Right. That people need to be aware of. It's changed. World Health Organization.
If like a vaccine company were funding them, and then in exchange for funding them, we're getting a requirement that you had to take their vaccine. That's kind of what you're describing, right?
Right.
It's a potential, not necessarily that that's happening, but could happen.
Well, no. What's happening is that it's not vaccine companies directly that are funding them, but it's like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I think it's I don't remember whether it's Gavi or CEPI. So those are both Bill Gates related, like NGOs that have an interest in vaccines. I mean, if you have major funders that would make a lot of money if vaccines were the solution, funding the World Health Organization, then you're going to get a conflict of interest that could result in vaccines being pushed like they were for the COVID-19 pandemic, where the vaccines were like the only answer, and doctors were saying, well, no, wait, there's early treatment.
Right.
There's all these great drugs that we can repurpose that are helping people, that can save lives.
Right.
And they were just shot down, and the vaccine was seen as like the only path.
In the very beginning, I believe, of even when we were dealing with AIDS back in the 80s and 90s, they were trying to find like a moonshot for AIDS, like a one drug solution. And at the end of the day, what they wound up being able to figure out is if we give a cocktail of medicines that treats symptoms, using drugs that have been around for a while, people have a chance of being able to fight the virus and live. And the same kind of thing was happening with COVID, and it likely will happen with new viruses as well in the future.
Right. Doctors need to be able to be free to figure out what works with their patients,
right,
and prescribe those things. And what will happen if these World Health Organization amendments and the treaty come through is that, like, the World Health Organization will be sitting in your doctor's office with you, because they're going to be mandating. They will have the ability to mandate, for example, vaccines, and your doctor might not think that that's the right thing for you, and he or she is not going to have the power to stop it. It's going to be really hard for them. Okay,
right.
So it's a huge disruption in the doctor-patient relationship. And then there's a third instrument that we have to talk about also.
Okay,
which is at the end of the last Congress, on December 23rd of 2022, was passed the NDAA.
Yes.
That was, I think, 1,700 plus pages long. And on page 950, there was something called the International Pandemic Preparedness Act of 2022. And I don't think anybody even had the chance to read this. I don't think that people had the chance to read this huge bill. It's one of those, well, you can read it after it passes kinds of things.
And it must pass or America will collapse as we know it.
And you can read it later.
Right.
And you can, yeah. Well, hiding in that act, right in the middle of it, page 950, is this International Pandemic Preparedness Act, which arguably pre-approves anything that the WHO decides. So in there's I want to get the exact wording here.
Okay.
So this is in the definition section, and it says here, it obligates the United States to, quote, comply with and adhere to the International Health Regulations of 2005. So and several other known treaties, and then it says, and other relevant frameworks that contribute to global health security. I mean, talk about broad
Yeah.
Other relevant frameworks that contribute to global health security?
If frameworks aren't, at least when it's referencing the international health regulations, those are set, they're written down, they're firm. Nations have approved them within the World Health Organization, but a framework is just, it's an outline.
Right.
It may or may not be approved by anyone.
That's right. And this is requiring us to comply and adhere to them. So anyway, arguably, the amendments to the international health regulations and the new pandemic treaty are other relevant frameworks that contribute to global health security. That's why it is being argued that these are pre-approved by our government, by an act of Congress already. And something I really want the listeners to understand, people think that our Senate is going to protect us. It's like, oh, I'm not going to worry about that. It'll never pass our Senate.
Because the treaty requires a supermajority for the Senate. So that's probably part of why they think that.
Right. Well, that's the law. But are we going to follow the law? Okay, Senator Ron Johnson just had a bill saying this has to pass the Senate, and it was voted down. So we don't have the Senate to protect us. We can't just say, oh, it's okay, our Senate will protect us.
And it was voted down, I believe, on party lines, on straight party lines.
That's my understanding, that the Republicans voted for it and the Democrats voted against it.
And it's thinking that you and I are calling it a treaty because that's what it is. It would have the effect of, but it's not being treated as a treaty. It's being treated as an accord, which would not require approval from Congress at all. And it would just require, I suppose, a president and executive to sign agreement with it.
Right. That's the way they are treating it. That is correct.
It's sneaky and it's wrong to do that. So the vote in the World Health Organization is happening in May. And one of the things in the coalition that you and Frank have begun, the Sovereignty Coalition, where you're working on calls to action to try to influence, and first raise awareness and then try to influence what happens with this. Is it simply a matter of stopping the accord, or are you guys at this point aiming a bit higher?
Well, you know what, Jenny Beth? I mean, I would love to say that we want to stop the accord, but we are one vote out of 194 at the World Health Organization. And we would have a chance to stop it if we could, if our Senate were going to take it up, and then we could have a battle in the Senate and try to stop it. But our Senate has said they're not going to take it up. So I, unfortunately, think that we can't stop the international health regulations or the accord because they are being promulgated by a supranational, bureaucratic, non-elected, unaccountable organization imposing its will on the United States. So the only way that we can stop this from coming to our shores is by withdrawing from the World Health Organization.
And are there any members of Congress right now who seem willing to do that?
I think that there may be. So,
okay.
So yes.
So what the call to action that the coalition is making is withdrawal from the World Health Organization.
That's the only thing that's going to get the United States out of this situation is withdrawing from the World Health Organization.
And that's a huge undertaking.
Sure it is, but President Trump did it. It's not like it's impossible. It can be done.
Explain what happened with Trump.
Well, I mean, he saw that the World Health Organization was completely botching the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay.
And so he said, we're withdrawing, and he withdrew. But the problem is that when you withdraw from the World Health Organization, it takes a year to get out. So we didn't get out by the time that Biden came into office.
Okay.
And so he just put us right back in. So we never even got to be out.
Okay. So, and we're in a situation right now, we're recording this in 2023, and we still have a presidential election in 2024. And so we don't have a new president, potentially, until 2025. And hopefully we have a new president in 2025. So it seems to me that it's, at the moment, an education and awareness campaign for people to understand what's going on with the World Health Organization, and the implications of what they are doing, and what the previous Congress already did through the NDAA, and then to begin calling for the withdrawal from the World Health Organization, understanding that it may take even until 2025 before that happens.
Right, precisely. We need to withdraw now, like May of 2023,
right?
So that we are out by May of 2024, so that the current administration doesn't have between May of 2024 and 2025 to implement it.
Right.
Yeah. So we need to get out now.
Right. We do need to get out now. And how do you think that's going to happen? And if it doesn't happen, what would be the next step if it doesn't happen in the timeline you just outlined?
Well, I think that everybody should go on to the stopvaxpassports.org and sign our Align Act, and it's a campaign where you can send an email to your legislators and also to people within the Biden administration as well as Biden himself, saying that the U.S. should withdraw from the WHO. There's already a campaign on that website. Right. But also there will be a campaign, and I believe by the time this broadcast, I can safely say there's a campaign on the sovereigntycoalition.org. Sovereigntycoalition.org. There will be an Align Act campaign to get the U.S. out of the WHO. And then that's a way to raise the visibility in Congress, because I think that Congress doesn't even realize that this is happening. I think most members of Congress don't even know about that pandemic act that was hidden in the NDAA.
Probably not. We saw recently that Lindsey Graham signed onto a bill that Jesse Waters had him on a Fox News program, and Lindsey Graham didn't even know what was in the bill he had signed on as co-sponsor to. So it's very likely that they don't know what's in it, or the implications of what was in that NDAA.
Right. So we need to, the best way to alert your congressional representative is to take action on one of those two websites, so Sovereignty Coalition. And so then hopefully we'll get bills sponsored saying, the U.S. should withdraw from the WHO. And I also think that it should be, an election issue, that every candidate should be questioned on what's your position. Should we withdraw from the WHO? That should be an issue.
I think that's very important. I think that the legislation is extremely important because you've got to put the marker down and start working towards it. And possibly it'll pass the House. Possibly it could be tied to must-pass legislation that would force the Senate to vote for it and the president to sign it into law. And so those things may happen. And even if they don't happen, at the same time as we have candidates announcing their candidacy for president, for Senate, for Congress, and I would even say governors at this point, because governors can put pressure on D.C. To start asking point blank, are you in favor of the United States withdrawing from the World Health Organization?
Yes, absolutely. And the governors are really important, because here's a lawsuit that I'd love to possibly launch. But healthcare is not an enumerated power that is given to the federal government.
Right.
So a lawsuit could challenge this whole thing on constitutional grounds, saying that the federal government, that the Biden administration through executive order did not have the authority to give away the state's rights towards health care to the World Health Organization. You like that? Yeah, I'm thinking about that.
I bet some attorney generals would like that as well.
Yeah.
We've got some good fighters in state attorney generals around the country.
Right. So state resistance, even states could file lawsuits like that.
Right.
That's a great idea for multiple state lawsuits.
Right.
So it should be it should be a major issue brought up to candidates for governor.
And maybe even let's expand it one step further to say state, if they're running for an attorney general within a state as well.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that this is good it's a good discussion because we're explaining what's happening, we're explaining some of what could happen, and then we're explaining action items that people can take immediately, and even in their battles worth fighting. And I'm not suggesting that we should not be fighting them or that we're necessarily going to lose. But I am saying, even if we don't win those battles and we put everything into it and we try, even if we don't win, there are still other opportunities. And part of that is that citizens need to be asking the candidates, are you for withdrawing from the World Health Organization, and driving that as a topic so that candidates understand that's what we're expecting in new administrations and new legislative sessions beginning in 2025 as well.
Right. So even if we don't succeed in withdrawing from the World Health Organization, that is where state resistance is going to become extremely important. Right.
And one thing that I mentioned to you, I with Frank Gaffney, worked very hard to oppose the Iran deal back in 2015 and 2016. And President Obama entered us into it against what I wanted to have happen, and it treated it as if it was not a treaty when really it should have been a treaty. And then we had a President Trump, who withdrew us from that Iran deal, and Biden tried to get us back into it and was not able to because the way that the world dynamics had shifted, which was a good thing, I thought. So as frustrating as it was to me back in 2015 and 2016, and knowing that there were pallets of cash going to Iran as a result of that deal, United States cash, I still think it's important we fight the battle at hand right now, and it's a worthy battle, and we give it all that we possibly can. And we look at if we win, this is great, and if we don't win, what's the next? Where does the next line of defense come in? And we just keep thinking in those terms. I think that's important for our listeners to understand, because we want them to know all hope is not lost. Don't go dig a hole in your yard and build a shelter and don't fight. Fight and stand up for what is right, even though what we've described is really scary. It's very terrifying, the kind of power that we're talking about giving away.
Yes, it is. This is the time for everybody to become active.
Right.
Okay. We need to stop this thing. It'd be much easier to stop it now than it's going to be almost impossible to stop it, Jenny Beth, once this trap shuts and we have sort of the vaccine passport and the central bank digital currency. Because then if you start dissenting, you're just going to be shut off.
The fact is, once government programs start, look at Obamacare, it's almost impossible to roll it back.
Right. So the time to act is now. Right.
Okay. And give the website, the two websites you mentioned, give those one more time.
Well, I've got women's rights without frontiers.org if you want to help, save babies and widows in China. Then Stop Vax Passports. That's Stop VAX Passports. Has the best series of webinars in the world, I think, with top experts on this issue. And then sovereigntycoalition.org is where we are very specifically trying to protect U.S. sovereignty from the incursions by the World Health Organization.
And the name of the coalition is so important because America should remain a sovereign nation in charge of itself and governing itself. And that's what we're trying to defend is our country as a sovereign nation.
Yes, and also there's the issue of personal sovereignty of each human being able to make decisions about their own health with their doctor and not with the World Health Organization sitting next to them, in their medical office.
So sovereignty in this case applies to the nation and the individual.
Absolutely.
It's very good. It's a very good name for the coalition.
Thank you.
Well, Reggie, I just appreciate so much that you took the time today to come in and explain this very complex and important and urgent topic to the audience. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jenny Beth. It's an honor.
I'm Jenny Beth Martin. This is the Jenny Beth Show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
The Jenny Beth Show is hosted by Jenny Beth Martin, produced by Kevin Mooneyhan, and directed by Luke Livingston. The Jenny Beth Show is a production of Tea Party Patriots Action. For more information, visit teapartypatriots.org.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to stop freedom thieves from turning our country into a communist nightmare, be sure to click the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And while you're at it, click the notifications bell to get an alert every time we post a new episode.